Support comes from Goethe Pop-Up Seattle, presenting 55 Voices for Democracy, a podcast that brings together conversations with intellectuals, artists, and activists. Inspired by Thomas Mann's speeches produced for the BBC during the rise of fascism in Europe. Available on Apple Podcast and Spotify.
Hey, it's Jeannie Yandel in for Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday, and this is Seattle Now. The pandemic has caused millions of people to lose their jobs, but Amazon is hiring at historic levels. In a minute, we'll hear from Karen Wise, a Seattle-based reporter for the New York Times. She'll tell us about Amazon's pandemic hiring push and what that means. But first, let's get you caught up. Washington State just launched an app to notify people that they've been in close contact with someone with COVID-19. We're joining more than a dozen other states that already use smartphone technology to try to prevent the spread of COVID-19. Starting yesterday, people with iPhones can enable the exposure notifications feature already in their phone settings. And Android devices can download the app called WA Notify. Use of the app is voluntary, and users can opt out at any time. The statewide expansion comes after a month-long pilot project at the University of Washington. More than 30 patients and staff at the state's largest psychiatric hospital are sick from coronavirus. That's the biggest spike to date at Western State Hospital in Lakewood. More than 150 people have tested positive since the virus first hit the hospital in March. The Department of Social and Health Services, or DSHS, says the spike in cases reflects the increase being seen across the country. And a new report from the University of Washington says the Northwest Immigration and Customs Enforcement Processing Center in Tacoma uses solitary confinement more than any other dedicated ICE facility. The UW Center for Human Rights report says people with mental health issues and those who have gone on hunger strikes have been put in solitary confinement, in some cases for longer than 15 days, which, quote, runs afoul of international standards, end quote, and in the case of the hunger strikers, suggests retaliation. A spokesperson for ICE's Northwest region told the Seattle Times that ICE, quote, respects the rights of all people to voice their opinion without interference. If you work in restaurants, retail, or the arts, you already know COVID has wreaked havoc on your employment. Amazon has no such concerns. On average, they've hired 1,400 workers every day of 2020, growing their workforce to over 1.2 million people. Labor historians and economists alike say this rate of hiring is unrivaled by any other American company. Karen Wise is a New York Times reporter based here in Seattle. She's been reporting on Amazon's pandemic hiring spree. Karen Wise with the New York Times, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to join you.
Amazon has been hiring an average of 1,400 people every single day over the course of the last year. Can you put that into perspective for us? How significant is that kind of hiring?
A lot of it is kind of, we're not supposed to use the word unprecedented, but it's essentially unprecedented. It violates our style guide to say that. But when I talked with labor economists and labor historians, they say that this basically, we have not seen before one company hire this many people that quickly. And you've seen it either at that speed and scale at an industry level. So like shipbuilding at the beginning of World War II, or kind of Rosie the Riveter and aircraft building. But to see it with one company has been truly unique at this scale and this speed, essentially.
One of the things that jumped out at me in your piece about the scale is you compared the total number of employees working for Amazon worldwide to the population of Dallas, Texas, which is the 9th largest city in the United States. We're talking well over 1 million residents. I mean, is Amazon on track to surpass Dallas?
Yes, Amazon.
In terms of population?
Yes. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if potentially even next quarter Amazon surpasses Dallas, or the quarter after. That's soon, most likely. Asterisk. I'm not a forecaster, but I think it would be surprising if it did not happen. They're on track, depending on the growth rates. If they were to take this kind of recent growth pattern and continue that for the next little bit, they would surpass Walmart probably in about a year and a half to be the world's largest employer.
I want to go back to that word unprecedented again in terms of the hiring that Amazon is doing here. I mean, another word that one of the labor historians you talked to said that this is unrivaled by any other American company in terms of hiring. So what does that mean for people who are looking for work right now?
Yeah, so one thing Amazon talks about, and they've actually used in their recruiting, is they are hiring when a lot of industries are laying people off. And again, that is part of the unique nature of the recession right now. So they had partnerships with hotel companies, travel industry, Uber to say, hey, we may be furloughing people, or you may not have as many Uber rides, but Amazon is hiring. So it was a way that they kind of built this labor pipeline, essentially. And it is also certainly a big part, I would say, of their kind of promotion, is that we are this employer at this time of need for a lot of Americans, and people are kind of looking for work because of the downturn.
Well, but some of the data suggests that particularly for warehouse workers for Amazon, which is my understanding is that's a particularly significant sector for employment growth within Amazon, is that those injury rates are just going up and going up and going up. In fact, they've gone up every year since 2016, according to the Center for Investigative Reporting. And that investigation also found that injuries spike in the weeks of Prime Day and Cyber Monday. So we're talking about this week. How does that play into Amazon's rapid hiring?
I think part of what is interesting is a lot of Amazon work is sort of in some way kind of replacing some retail work, and it's different than retail work. So it actually pays better than retail work in general, like being a retail salesperson, but it is also more physical. Like you are out, you're moving things, and it pays less than traditional warehouse work, but it's also different than traditional warehouse work. You're not moving huge pallets of material, you're picking individual products. And the work is really broken down to be that fast and efficient. You're doing one task over and over and over again, typically. So that has a higher risk of potentially repetitive injury rates. Although Amazon, again, says they do a lot to try to adjust their safety stuff to kind of counteract that. So it is a really new type of work to meet this kind of new model of serving customer whims, essentially.
One of the quotes that stood out to me in the piece that you wrote was that this idea that we are turning into Amazon Nation. What do you think that means for those of us here in Seattle? I guess we are the capital of Amazon Nation in Seattle. What does that mean for us, do you think?
Well, it was Margaret O'Mara, who's a professor at UW, who said that. And she was talking about how kind of Amazon, it is a national employer now. It has warehouses and infrastructure, and in many cases tech hubs, and almost, it has jobs in almost every state at this point. That means it has kind of the political leverage that comes from being a big employer in every state. Hey, Congressman, we have this, we employ 4,000 people in your district. Like, that's not small,
Right.
But it is certainly true that I think the Seattle area still has more Amazon kind of growth and hiring to come. And they've said that they have plans, particularly on the east side in Bellevue, to really grow the kind of tech side of it. So I think all employers are kind of wondering how the kind of remote work piece will work after the pandemic for the industries like Amazon, that a chunk of the work could be done remotely. So I think that's kind of a big question mark. But they literally own a lot of real estate in Seattle and the Seattle region. And so the thought that I think that kind of it will still be this huge employer in the city, and other large employers aren't having the best moment. Boeing is in the region is struggling. Nordstrom is not doing great. So it's their centrality in the regional economy, I think, will remain.
One of the things I was thinking about before we talked today is how my own shopping habits have changed over the course of the pandemic. I use Amazon delivery a lot more than I used to. Because I want to avoid going into brick and mortar stores, obviously. But it occurred to me that in a way, we're sort of captive consumers for services like Amazon, particularly like Amazon, because I can get everything I need through Amazon without leaving my house. How might Amazon take advantage of that, I guess, opportunity that we're all a bunch of consumers that they can just kind of play with in terms of what their post-pandemic business model looks like?
Well, I would say, broadly, the pandemic created this kind of rupture in behavior that like you couldn't do your normal things. And so the question will be how much of that sticks, essentially. And so I think like one thing that might be a kind of somewhat permanent change is in the US, people didn't buy groceries online that much. It just was a really small percent of the market. And a lot of people began doing that and there's a lot of reasons why. It's actually not typically a great experience. Nah, that avocado was too mushy. Nah, you replaced my cilantro, which was out of stock, with parsley. And like, those are different things. It's actually very complicated. But the more that you do it, the more you kind of figure out how to do it, essentially, and what works well to buy that way. And it knows that you want organic bananas, not conventional bananas, and it recommends that next time. So I think those are the sort of behaviors that might permanently change. I think like buying online and picking up in stores actually been quite successful for a number of retailers, and it was existing before and has certainly accelerated during the pandemic, and I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Am I being cynical here in thinking that one of the things you're saying is that Amazon is training us to be better online consumers?
No, I think that's true. And I think you could also say it's pushing people to try things they hadn't tried before, because habits are habits. And you sometimes need an excuse to change them. And those can be many different things. And this happened to be this kind of huge rupture in everything, basically. On the flip side, like it has the demands of consumers has pushed Amazon to figure out new systems and new ways to serve kind of the crazy demand that they're seeing right now. I mean, all of this hiring is because people are ordering. And so they are still trying to catch up and get back to that really fast turnaround that they had been kind of really working towards before the pandemic.
Karen Wise is a Seattle-based reporter for the New York Times. Her latest piece looks at the, again, we'll use the word unprecedented growth of Amazon's hiring in warehouses and elsewhere. Karen, thank you so much.
Sure, thank you.
Seattle Now is produced by Matt Martin, Sophie Reed, Clare McGrane, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Jeannie Yandel, in for Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.
Hey, I'm Patricia Murphy with a reminder that KUOW is a non-profit news organization. That means everything you hear, including this podcast, is powered by listener support. Consider making a gift of any size using the link in our description in honor of Giving Tuesday on December 1st. And thanks.